Hey guys, good evening. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Tonight I'm going to be reacting to Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K episode 24 After Talk made by AFanWithTooMuchTime. If you guys want to check out the other episodes for Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K, remember the playlist card is going to be at the top here. Just click on it and be able to access them. If you want to check out the original video as well as AFanWithTooMuchTime's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. Remember, episode 24 is also in the reaction playlist, so you can watch that first and then you can come back to the after talk. Alright, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hey guys, it's a fan with too much time, and sorry that this after talk took so long. I've had to, man, this fucking sucks. Alright, so...
What?
As most of you likely know, and those who don't will now learn, GW has recently become insanely hostile to their own fan base. They have initiated a zero-tolerance policy toward any fan animations, which is directly spitting in the face of the people who have been providing free marketing, fan engagement, fan excitement, public excitement for their franchise. To say this is unacceptable is to use a word that is not powerful enough to describe what is really going on here. This is, in effect, a betrayal, because when any of us make properties or anything like this, we basically rely on the goodwill of the company and the IP holder to not strike us down, to see that we're all standing on the same side, and that the success of one does not mean the failure or downtrodden of the other. But GW has a very long history of doing things like this. I don't know why they choose to act this way. I'm not sure how the people who run the company are scared or frightened into behaving in such incredibly counterintuitive ways, and to do.
Yes, I know about this situation. It's just greed. It's just greed. You know, they want to cut down the trees. They want to clear the forest of creators. You know, those who create Warhammer 40K content. They want to clear that forest, and they want to start their own plantation of their own content. And they hope that, you know, Warhammer 40K fans are just going to flock to Warhammer Plus. You know, that's the name of their plantation, Warhammer Plus. And yeah, they're just willing to cut down, you know, other creators, burn the forest, and make way for this plantation at any cost. But ultimately, it's about greed. They want to centralize everything under their umbrella, under their control, so that they are the truth, they are the word, and everyone else has to follow suit behind them. So yeah, it's all about consolidation of power and rights over the content, and of course making money.
Doing things that will really just damage them and their IP and their company. Perhaps it's self-sabotage. Perhaps there's much more going on here behind the scenes than we understand. But whatever it is, it definitely put into question how far I intend to go with even this. Because while I may not be an animation, I may not be making fan animations, you know very well why, if you've been listening to my after talks, you know very well why I feel the need to do this. I love Warhammer 40K, I love Star Wars, and I feel like certain things that don't fit inside of the legal IP diction of our current law system, such as crossovers and things like that, they should exist in some medium, even if you don't get paid for it. But this really sours my motivation. Do I want to introduce more people to Warhammer when I know that it just goes to feeding, like, these horrendous motherfuckers sitting at GW who are making these mindless decisions? who are hurting us, their fans. I mean, it's our money that fills their pockets. How dare they turn around and strike us like this? This doesn't make any sense. And so it definitely made me stop and ask myself, how far do I intend to go with this? And the answer I've come to is, okay, I'm just going to get to the end of Season 1, and then we'll see. We'll see. But the end of Season 1 may be the very end of Star Wars versus 40K, because frankly, it's not like Star Wars is doing they're recovering right now from what is essentially them doing something similar, where they're attacking their fans, attacking what it is to be Star Wars, attacking people for no reason and putting titles on people and being really toxic. And Disney was just doing that, and they've just recently stopped and are starting to get better. And now we have Warhammer doing something that is debatably worse. So much worse and so much more personal. So I've put too much into this to not try to go at least as far as Season 1. And again, I don't ever intend to monetize this, so for me, it really is just a work of fan love, and it always has been. And when that love begins to die, that work will no longer exist, because that's all that's motivating its production. And right now, I'm just in a really bad place when it comes to GW. This is a ridiculous thing. And so, what I'm going to do about it, and, maybe I'm being childish here. Maybe I'm out of my depth. Maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe by even saying what I plan to do, I'm putting a target on myself. But, I'm going to leave bad reviews on the games of GW that I own. And in the reviews, talk about how this isn't so much about the game, so much as it's about the company who owns the game. I'm going to go onto forums and spread word about this. I'm going to go and send complaints. I'm going to be loud as fuck on every single wavelength that I can be loud as fuck at, to try to get them to reverse this. And I would love it if they could understand their mistake and reverse this before Warhammer Plus or before Warhammer Plus launches, or whatever we're going to call it. Because I want to enjoy that. I want to purchase that streaming platform. I want to watch their animated content. I want to support it. But right now I can't. And unfortunately, if Warhammer Plus released, like right now or tomorrow,
do whatever you can to try and get the attention of Games Workshop. Get people who also think like you do. Get people who are also willing to send messages to Games Workshop. Those who are willing to not subscribe to Warhammer Plus. Get as many people as possible that are not going to be subscribing to them, so that they get the message that the supporters, the fans, don't like what's happening right now. They don't like the fact that they have to be paying for Warhammer Plus, while they were invited or they were inducted into Warhammer 40K by YouTube creators or other social media creators who created content around Warhammer 40K, or Warhammer. Do however you can in terms of disturbing Games Workshop's progress, and then they can take notice, hopefully, because ultimately this is still about greed. It's just them wanting more money, wanting them to consolidate everything under their roof. So you just have to make yourselves loud and irritating, and they'll have to take notice of you guys. Yeah. I wonder how that's going on right now. I wonder if the ban is still active. I'm not entirely sure, but what AFanWithTooMuchTime is saying here, it's good. If you have the struggle, try to see it to the end. Get as many people around you who can also help to see it to the end.
All right, so I just checked, and Warhammer Plus comes out on August 25th, I think. It goes live on August 25th. So they have until August 25th, basically, to get back a shitload of goodwill that they've just lost. And I won't be able to. And I want to. I fucking want to. But I will not be able to purchase Warhammer Plus. I will have to boycott them and show them in their wallets where they've gone wrong because they don't listen to anything else. I hate doing this. I hate hurting Warhammer, even if it's for its own good, even if it's so that we don't get a worse Warhammer and an abusive company in control of it. But I'm going to boycott Warhammer products. I'm going to leave bad reviews everywhere I can. I'm going to be loud about this. And, you know, some people are demanding incredible concessions be made, or concessions that are unusual. I'm not demanding any concessions be made, typically. Just be like Disney, Warhammer, and let your fans support you, you know? Like, you don't find Disney attacking fan works like this. If somebody's monetizing, it's a kind of a question, but even then, God, especially when you have something that is as niche as Warhammer, why on the earth would you choose to do this and to zero tolerance it? Even the language that is chosen is so fucking Nazi. It's not what we deserve as the contributing fan base of this IP. It's definitely the wrong response to have as this streaming service goes out. And the only way to show them that is to boycott it unless they reverse course before it launches. I hate to say that. I hate to harp on it. That's what I'm going to do. And honestly, I don't think I'm doing the wrong thing. I really don't. You should do whatever you, as a fan of Warhammer, think will help this IP grow in the right way and become what it needs to become, and encourage more people to engage with it. If you care enough to. So I'll go ahead and go to the end of Season 1. And then after that, I'll have to just take stock, because shit does not feel good right now. I had also a bunch of these other narratives planned up to set up that were just inside of Warhammer 40K. And, you know, I don't fucking feel any of that right now. Maybe I'll feel better later, but it's been a while now. I've been sitting on this for a minute now. I'm not feeling good. I feel like this beloved IP that I was personally super interested in has been totally abused and hijacked, and is being used as a cudgel against us by a company that frankly is proving more and more they don't deserve to own it. And ultimately, they get all their shit from us. All their patronage from us. We should show them what happens when you decide to slap and fucking bite the hand that feeds you. Because we are that hand. And it's incredible to see the hubris and the blindness involved in a decision like this. And I certainly encourage you to do what you think you should do about it, in whatever form, creative or traditional, that should take. Because this shit right here is ultra fucked. Okay? Zero tolerance policy, man. Can you believe that shit? On people who've just been contributing their time and effort and lives to this thing out of just pure fan love. And they throw that in our face. They throw that away. You know, thinking that they're only attacking the animators and not the entire community that those animators represent. So short-sighted. Well, you know how to make short-sighted companies change. You know what makes them notice when they fucked up. Unfortunately, it's only one thing. It's their fucking wallets. So that's it for me, man. They just lost a Disney Plus. They just lost a Warhammer Plus customer. They just lost the guy who's gonna. They just lost every fucking thing that they are selling that I was gonna buy. They just lost it. I basically purchase every freaking Warhammer video game. I basically buy every new fucking Warhammer book. That's on total fucking hiatus now. I'm not touching anything like that. I cannot feel good about myself supporting a company like that. That is so in my face about how unfriendly they are toward the people who are feeding their fan base and arguably growing it more than they are.
You know, I don't know if Warhammer Plus is achieving its goals to, garner enough views and subscribers. But what I do know is that people are taking those Warhammer 40K, Warhammer Plus content, and they are posting it on TikTok. There's a lot of TikTok users out there that are using, Warhammer Plus content and showing it on their channels or their TikTok handles. So yeah, I don't know if they're achieving their goals, but people are finding other ways for people to enjoy Warhammer 40K content that they don't necessarily have to go through Warhammer Plus. Yeah, and I just don't know. I just don't know if Games Workshop's idea of burning down this forest is actually working for them. Because the YouTube creators are the ones who spread the information of Warhammer 40K to the rest of the public. They do a far better job than Games Workshop would ever do in terms of a marketing strategy to get new subscribers, to get new people involved into Warhammer, to get new fans into Warhammer. It's far better when it's those who are the true fans who know this lore inside and out, who are entertainers and people who know what they're doing on YouTube, to spread the word of Warhammer 40K. It will be so much easier. But because of greed, because people want money, they are willing to shoot their own foot. They're willing to shoot their foot and go on with a broken foot, drag themselves as long as they get the money.
It's like they're ashamed of themselves, and they should be. So, sorry to start off with that. I'm sorry that shit's so hardcore, that I come off as such a hard ass about it potentially. I don't want to. Shit sucks, but there is a moral imperative here. And dude, human creativity should not be held hostage by this bullshit, I love capitalism, but there are certain places that it needs to be, sort of mediated for the sake of what it is to be human and not just a money-making entity or creature. Fucking ridiculous, man. Fucking ridiculous. So, moving on from that, and on to things that are a bit better, hopefully, right? Let's do the Q&A. Let's go ahead and dive into the Q&A. I'll do a few of these before I get off. And I noticed that Spook, someone who's been here with the channel a very long time,
Spook,
left me a pretty lengthy Q&A, so I'll go ahead and address that right now. Let's take a look. All right. So, I guess I'll go ahead and read the question. Forge World allegiances. As we know, all Forge Worlds theoretically owe their loyalties to Mars, but in practice, many Forge Worlds sway from Mars to other venerable Forge Worlds such as Ryza, Lucius, Akadentran, Metallica, Graia, etc. Other Forge Worlds can commonly have different factions within owe allegiance to different worlds, and even rarer are Forge Worlds which are wholly independent of said forges, who just operate on their own. Usually, said Forge Worlds are protected by their master's legio. For example, a forge owing allegiance to Forge World Lucius will be protected by the Legio Astorum, aka Warprunners, aka Teleporting Titans. They also usually get information exclusive to the Forge. Okay, so let me just go ahead and before I have to deal with the rest of this question here, because this is very much not going to be the case in Zectech. Zectech is extremely insular, and all the Forge Worlds inside have a spiritual... Like, I'll say this. In the same way that the Emperor becoming a corpse on the throne and thereby mute for the most part made him really easy to worship and really easy for virtually anybody in the Imperium to declare for and to claim to be behind, because he effectively has a will that you can superimpose over your own will. That has become what Mars is to many of the Forge Worlds in the Zectech sector, and this is entirely because of the instability between consistent travel and communication between any of the worlds within the Zectech sector and the rest of the greater Imperium. So it's not really viable for them to depend on other Forge Worlds for their protection, because they simply won't be able to apply that protection many times when they're needed. Remember, the biggest threats to the among the biggest threats to the Zectic sector has been the Terrafont Entente, and the Terrafont Entente is an alien race that, a conglomeration of alien races that would wait very intentionally for the Zectic sector to seal off before launching their attacks or even making their presences known as like having survived the Last Crusade. Very intentionally, knowing that the Imperium as a whole cannot be beat, but that the Zectic sector can be isolated and crushed, or at least in theory crushed. It never succeeded, but got close. Due to this, the worlds, especially the Forge worlds inside of Zectic, are incredibly independent and beholden only to each other. There are a few Forge worlds that sort of dominate Zectic, and those will be revealed as we go along the story. But that's what you're going to find much more than what you find in other cases. So, moving on.
It seems to me the Zectic sector, if I can say that, has been mainly independent from the rest of the Imperium for a very long time. Not just the Forge worlds, but also all the other worlds within that sector. You know, they haven't really had proper communication or trade links with the rest of the galaxy. And so they are a bit more independent than, you know, other sectors across the galaxy. And since they're in the Star Wars galaxy right now, I think they're going to make it. You know, they're going to be very successful in this place because they already know how to survive without the support of the rest of the Imperium. They already know how to, you know, make it work with whatever they have. And I think it's going to be something that is at their advantage when they start to plant roots or plant seeds or plant roots in the Star Wars galaxy. It's going to be very easy for them. They're not going to really have an issue with that. And yeah, their forces are resolute in making sure that they have a beachhead in the Star Wars galaxy. So yeah.
On to the next one. Will we see Clone Lancers ever? Clone Lancers, if I'm not mistaken, Clone Lancers are the hoverbike riding clones who have excuse me, got some gas, I guess. They ride hoverbikes and have what do you call them? Vibro lances. Yes, there we go. Will we see Clone Lancers? Potentially. I can't really tell you. Will we see Stealth Troopers? Again, potentially. You know, I'm aware of all of them, but I can't give away too much about who I'm going to use and when. Otherwise, it kind of steals the punch if they should occur.
So the clones also have like a cavalry charge. They have these motorcycles that they use, these levitating motorcycles with lances to strike at the enemy. It's just reminding me of the soldiers of Krieg and their horses that they use with those spears with an explosive tip. Yeah, it just reminds me of them. I'm just wondering whether they'll have the same sort of metal about them like the soldiers of Krieg. You know, them just charging straight into the jaws of death, not stopping, not evading, not doing anything, just moving forward, just pushing forward. I'm just wondering if the clones are prepared to do the same towards the Imperium of Man forces.
Let's see here. This isn't really a question, but more of a suggestion. Whenever you introduce Titans into the story in Season 2 or 3, can you make the steps of the Emperor Warlord Titan reminiscent of the seismic tanks we saw in the Clone Wars? We'll see, you know, depending on what they're walking on and what's going on. One of my favorite aspects of 40K is the grand political strategy that's always at play. The backstabbing, the alliances, the secret wars, And since Orion is going to make Tatooine the new Terra, I would highly advise against naming it Nova Terra, since that would associate it with Nova Terra Interium, or the new seat of power. It would be awesome if you made a new Imperial Senate, or as it is called in High Gothic, the Senatorium Imperialis, on Tatooine, similar to the one found on Terra itself, which had hundreds of thousands of members, each representing and heading individual organizations of the Imperial bureaucracy. Indeed, indeed, indeed.
Do we think that Chapter Master Orion is just going to relinquish power to some Senate? Probably that's going to be filled with humans, regular humans. Is he really going to relinquish his authority and power over every single human being in the Imperium of Man, over to some sort of civilian government? I don't know. Maybe, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
It would certainly show a very nice contrast of the Galactic Senate and the Separatist Parliament. Alright, that wasn't a question. I don't think. There will definitely be Warhammer 40K politics. As you can already tell, you're already seeing that form. Why do the guys from Star Wars Galaxy keep calling High Gothic guttural? High Gothic is more accurately Latin. Doesn't have any guttural sounds. In fact, the lack of guttural sounds is one of the main defining features of Latin. It's not Latin. It is Latin-esque, and we read it as Latin, but in my mind, it's impossible for it to be Latin, because too much time has passed. Latin, even today, we don't speak Latin the right way. Our pronunciations of Latin are highly corrupted from the original pronunciations of Latin, and there is even incredible debate amongst the phrases that we think we know how to pronounce between speakers of the language inside of, the science of linguistics. So the fact that Latin has gotten so mangled, 1,000 years maybe, or sometime like that, a few hundred years after it stopped being used in predominance, the fact that that has already happened tells me that 10,000 years down the line, it's going to be much, much worse. That 10,000 years down, any culture that still speaks Latin will be speaking their own dialect of Latin. And then 20,000 years down, same thing. So by the time we reach 30,000, year 30,000, when the Imperium would be starting off, maybe the Emperor has chosen to speak Old Latin. But I don't really know why he would do that. It's more likely the case that, in order to not put another arbitrary obstacle in the way of his empire making, that he would just choose the Terran dialect that is being used on Terra, start naming that Gothic, and then High Gothic or Low Gothic according to the ranks of people who speak it, and that is probably a derivative of Latin, that it was originally Latin. And so now your next question is probably, okay, so if we're accepting that High Gothic and Low Gothic are derivatives of Latin as opposed to more direct translations of Latin, why do I describe it as being guttural? And that's because, and by the way, this is not something that I even think would have been the case during the original Imperium when the Emperor was running it. I do imagine the language at the time was much more eloquent. It's, again, 10,000 years since High Gothic was coined. 10,000 years on millions, literally millions of planets.
Language is not static. If your language is static, if it just stays in one place, it's going to die. Languages must adapt with the times. They must, move forward with the people. If it does not move forward with the people, it will die. And whatever form of Gothic or High Gothic or Low Gothic may not be true Latin or not, it is to be expected. Like AFanWithTooMuchTime did say that, 10,000 years have passed by. The way people use the language may not be the same way that, they did in the beginning of the Imperium of Man, when the Emperor was still around. And even then, when the Emperor was still around using his version of Latin, it might be totally and utterly different to how people spoke Latin during the times of the Roman Empire. You know, their Latin was the Latin. It was pure. That's where it started. But their empire fell many years ago. And after the fall of Rome, there were other empires that kept on using Latin in terms of the religious text and, for prayer and all for these other top types of functions. And we also still use it. Not necessarily we use it, but it's still in law. Many of the words that are used in law books are still pronounced in their Latin words. But we don't speak Latin anymore, and I'm sure when the emperor decided to restart, the process of having his Imperium of Man speak Latin, their Latin is just totally different from the Roman Empire Latin. And yeah, it is just something that is going to happen. It's not going to be, exactly like how it was during the Roman Empire with their pronunciation and the way they spoke Latin. So it's to be expected. I mean, it's a lot of years, 10,000 years have passed by after he died, or not died, but he's in the golden throne. And like I said before, languages are meant to adapt with the times, are meant to move forward with the people. If it doesn't, it will die. Yeah.
High Gothic and Low Gothic have taken on the common culture of the Imperium. They have become brutal languages, belonging to an alien culture that seeks to destroy, smother, and crush out every other alien culture around it with extreme prejudice and extremely little, exception, with like virtually no exception, aside from those who can resist their strength. So for me, it follows that High Gothic would naturally have become corrupted into a language that you snarl as much as speak. That the Imperials of the Imperium are both composed of an incredible artistry as well as a unimaginable violence and tremendous savagery and brutality, almost like humans having both evolved forward and backwards at the same time, having become more enlightened and also more savage and bestial. And that is why I describe as High Gothic and Low Gothic as being guttural to the people of the Star Wars galaxy, because it comes from a culture and galaxy that is under such constant, vicious, ferocious threat that it's like a language that is half composed of a high vernacular and half composed of the snarling commands and the growling commands you would give in the midst of a life or death situation. That is my headcanon for that anyway. So then, let's see here. Got some more questions. In a previous discussion, we discussed void shields. You said that void shields work by dispersing the energy of the object in real space, or even deflecting it, making it a non-threat. Hold on. I'm not sure that's what I'm... If that's what I said, then I think that maybe you took it the wrong way, or that's not quite what I meant to say. Sorry, need some water there. Okay, so the way a void shield works, just so that I can be clear on the onset of this, before we continue with any questions. A void shield is like a stretch of disturbed space that is interspersed with the warp. Hitting a void shield will take whatever is hit it, whether energetic or projectile, and it will stretch it between this dimension and the warp dimension, thereby displacing its energy and force. Void shields can actually be so powerful that they effectively completely displace the object from real space and cause it to be completely non-threatening. This can happen, though it requires very powerful void shields to do it.
Where does this projectile or energy-based attack go once it's been displaced in our reality? Does it enter into the warp? Is that what the void shield does? Like it just transports anything that penetrates its barrier into the warp? What happens?
That being said, it's not like a warp gate. You know, void shields don't, even very powerful void shields wouldn't just send you into the warp if they completely displaced you. It would be more like how do I describe this? Almost like what a black hole singularity does to a person. You would be shredded, like cheese grated, stretched between here and the warp in a pretty violent way. It is the reason why you'll see missiles and stuff explode on the surfaces of void shields, because they take a tremendous amount of damage, though not direct impact, from encountering the field of the void shield. It's like
It seems to me that it takes a lot of power. It has a lot of power requirements for something like that to occur, you know, to activate a void shield. Don't they have like alternatives to void shields?
Take a plastic square, stretchy rubber square rather. Take a stretchy rubber square, draw a picture of a missile on it, and I'll take either end of that stretchy rubber square and pull it apart, like so that it stretches. The image of the missile will begin to disform and elongate and become less and less defined. That's more or less the effect it has, except that it never stretches back, rather jumps back to what it was normally like, and thereby returns the missile to normal. That wouldn't happen. I don't think you can hit a void shield, even a very powerful one, with a missile and effectively send like a missile into the warp, so to speak. So, continuing with your question. So, let's see here, void shields. But as I said during the discussion, that's not at all how they work. That's not how I intended to describe that, the way that it was described in that question. And what you described was closer to an ion shield used by Imperial Knights. Ion shields, yeah, are like more like traditional energy shields. They actually stop a projectile, like with physical force. Void shields work by literally displacing anything with enough energy that passes through them into the warp. Yeah, I already said this. Macro cannons or even torpedoes. I recently read Titan Death, and their Sanguinius file states that void shields transport things to the warp. Here's an excerpt. According to the systems of the Golden Plate, the void shields were still engaged, and at high levels of potency. Sanguinius was coming in too fast. He would trip their displacement reaction. If he was fortunate, he would be atomized as his being was displaced into the warp. If he were not, he would arrive there alive. Okay, so...
So he was using the void shields of a ship or a Titan, you know, to enter into the warp? Wow, okay, that's very crude. I don't know if it worked, but yeah.
That is interesting. I imagine that the only reason that Sanguinius himself might be able to hit a high-potency void shield and be transported into the warp whole and alive would be because he's a Primarch, and he's ridiculously difficult to destroy or, like, put down.
And how would he exit out of the warp once he's in there? You know, he's not protected by a gala field, I think. So what's going to happen to him when he's inside there? How is he going to get out?
Things won't survive the transit. They certainly won't survive arriving in the warp in any state, but they certainly shouldn't survive the transit either. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. That excerpt definitely does suggest that you can launch things whole into the warp. Man, there you go. Also, doesn't mean that a torpedo that trips a void is going to hit and kill a random daemon, because that's not how either the daemons work within the warp or how the warp itself works.
Just imagine a torpedo or a missile somehow survives attacking the void shields, and it is teleported into the warp and it hits a demon, some random demon. Oh, that would be so funny.
Kind of debatable there. We've definitely had examples of Chaos warships trapped inside of the warp, able to fire their weapons at daemons. Void shields up and void shields down, and those daemons do take damage from that weapon's fire, even if it's not enough to stop them. Daemons within the warp are far, far more powerful than they could ever wish to be within real space. Yeah, agreed. As they can literally create, modify, and destroy entire sectors of space down to the atom within even warp rifts. Some can, for sure. Greater daemons almost all can. I can agree with that. But if we're talking about, bloodthirst, I mean, not bloodthirsters, they're also very powerful. They're greater daemons. If we're talking about bloodletters and stuff like that, I don't think that bloodletters are creating their own sectors of space, even in the warp. I could be wrong, but I don't think that I am. Let me see here. They're more powerful within the warp proper. Here's an excerpt from the Rose Cluster created by a daemon in the Eye of Terror from the book Eye of Terror. Multiple multicolored suns fled past, some misshapen, some ringed shape. I think it's meant to be sun. I don't know. Some joined together in complicated patterns of filaments of light and fire. Some surrounded by what looked like intricate decorations made of gold and silver and brass. There was no consistency. No two were identical. It was a storm-enwrapped minor universe in which the minor laws of physics did not occur. The will and imagination of daemons counted for more. The Rose Cluster, Queeler said. Queeler kept saying. Queiler. Took for the Rose Cluster. Kaladin found it, coming at him from the darkness and distance, and despite everything that had already happened, he gasped with wonder. Maynard, he called, come and look at this. The traitor staggered from the pallet where he had been lying and peered out blearily. His arms drooped limply, his jaw sagged. The Rose Cluster was, as its name implied, a large cluster of stars. Typically, these were globular and contained thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of stars. In that respect, the cluster was unremarkable, except that all the stars were an entrancing pink color, and the entire cluster had the shape of a rose. It was all there, the curving petals, hundreds of light years across, picked out in sheets of stars and glowing gas, also pink. The petals, foliated one within another, layered down to a softly blazing heart. Some mighty daemon with a sense of beauty had crafted this. Kaladin powered the telescope, feeding its image to the view screen. One of the stars forming the cluster appeared before them. It too was the shape of a rose. Its radiant plasma magically suspended to form identical layers of soft petals. Every single sun in there is the same, Queiler told him. And that's not all. Every one of the planets in there is shaped like a rose too, thousands upon thousands of them. Okay, so to that, it should be meant. You shouldn't. It should be. It should be counted that even this passage here says some mighty daemon with a sense of beauty had crafted this. Mighty daemon, not just any daemon, but a mighty daemon. Not any daemon can do what you just described here. This is definitely the case of some greater daemon, even a king among greater daemons, having done something like this. They can do things like this. How much time it takes them, how difficult it really is in the warp for anything that can think and has a powerful will to do things like this. That's variable, and it's not clear how impressive that really is inside of the entire warp. But whenever it does occur, it is, in my recollection, always the work of a greater daemon or a daemon prince or something that is incredibly, incredibly powerful.
It might have been Petarabo in his free time. It might have been him in his free time just, making flowers in space with celestial bodies. You never know.
So let's see here. And there is also the fact, continuing the question, the quote-unquote question, and there's also the fact that the warp isn't a three-dimensional space. It is infinitely infinity. That double infinity isn't a mistake. Large space that is simultaneously both with 0 dimensions of space and infinite dimensions of space. Sure, there are pockets within it that are 3 and 4th dimensional like our universe, but these pockets are far and wide between. This means that these weapons traveling into the void would probably float for eternity in the materium until it gets pulled by the currents of the warp into a space hulk and stayed there for all eternity. Potentially, but they'd have to go inert first. it's much more likely that something will trigger them to detonate. And if they detonate, they'll probably do something. Not because the laws of physics matter so much, but because it would be the belief of the majority of the things in the universe that can comprehend and understand what a missile is or what a torpedo is, that when a torpedo detonates, it causes destruction and wounding to the things around it, which is what would give the laws of physics to the warp. Like, the thing is this. I feel like people overestimate how alien the warp would end up being. Don't get me wrong, it's still a hellscape. It'll still drive you crazy to look at it because it doesn't really, by any true measure, have to obey the laws of the physical universe. But it does obey its own laws, and its own laws are basically this. The laws of the Immaterium, by and large, are an averaging of what people feel and believe to be true throughout all of time and space, having poured their emotions and their thoughts into the warp. And these emotions and thoughts form the currents and the laws of physics that must be obeyed. Why are there even pockets of the warp that have three-dimensional and fourth-dimensional space in them that are not warp storms and are not intersections of the warp in real space? The reason is because, frankly, most beings that think and live and pour soul stuff into the warp exist in a four-dimensional space and are able to perceive to some degree 3 or 4 dimensions, and that memory of that sort of life and everything being coalesced and existed around that is what gives the warp its shape, and it's the reason why daemons even look like things that look like things. Why does a bloodthirster have teeth? It doesn't need to eat. It certainly hasn't evolved them because it wants them necessarily. Or
like, imagine people, instead of thinking of chaos demons as these monsters, think of them as cute teddy bears or bunny rabbits or something, then they would not necessarily come out of the warp looking as hideous as they are. They'd come out looking very cute, very colorful. They give out sweets instead of giving you violence and blood and gore and destruction. Just think of them that way. If enough human beings across the galaxy were to project that type of thought into the warp, I'm sure there's going to be different types of very colorful and cute demons out there, and I think they'll be harmless to the rest of humanity across the galaxy if a lot of us at the same time could think of demons that way. Just make a paradigm shift on how we perceive demons. Things are going to change, I think.
why does it want them if it does? Well, it wants them or evolves them or has them because of how people think about demons and what that demon there is representing. That being violence and battle, of which teeth and fangs tend to be pretty relevant of. So, you know, it's important to take all of that into consideration. Because while it is technically true that the warp doesn't have to obey the laws of physics, when it doesn't, it's because of it's a result of like psychological madness also being an influence in the warp. It's because belief and thought and feeling count for much more than empirical science within the warp. But belief and thought and feeling can still back up what is otherwise backed up by empirical science. This will often be the case. You can give a person a heart attack by pretending to strike them with a lethal weapon and not actually striking them at all. And that would kill you in the warp, and you'd never even have to make contact. Just so long as you believed it did, it would probably be enough to do it. So then, continuing on. In a previous Q&A, you claimed, sorry if I misunderstood your position, that the Imperials wouldn't be able to easily use hyperdrives because navicomputers are far more advanced than the Imperial cogitators, but that most likely isn't the case, as even data slates have been shown to hold petabytes worth of data. This is not about capacity. So let's be clear about a few things. The Imperium has a lot of advanced technologies, but one thing they don't really keep is thinking machines. Thinking machines that do more than just remember things or store data are servitors, largely in the Imperium. You can do a lot with a servitor, don't get me wrong. And trust me, there are automated systems in the Imperium that certainly come super close to being what you'd consider to be thinking machines, even skirting the lines of what's allowed. I think that the most egregious example of that would be the Call Superior, but there are targeting systems and stuff in the Imperium that also come close to that are probably integrated with some sort of human brain parts just to make them legal. You have to remember how Star Wars hyperdrives and navicomputers work. It used to be the case in old Star Wars that the calculations and the stuff involved in hyperdrives and navicomputers are so complex and involve so much intense calculation and so much processing power that a single navicomputer could only hold 6 or 7 coordinates at a time. That's nuts. 6 or 7 destinations at a time, and you have to get another navicomputer. And these things are not easy to get. They're not inexpensive. They're not small. That was how it was in the Old Republic, and then slowly droids came to replace navicomputers, and navicomputers came to be more and more like droids, just without personality cores. But they began to resemble the complexities of an artificial intelligence. And the reason for this is because of the way that hyperdrives have to work. You can only really hyperdrive in a straight line. And you can curve slightly in that straight line, but not very much, and not enough to really make a gigantic difference. Not enough to consider it for maneuvering. When you need to maneuver in hyperdrive, you usually have to stop, reorient yourself, and start again. You might have to do this hundreds of times per second even, depending on where you are and what the space around you is like and what the mass shadows are like. This can be done by hand, but it's very slow and hard. It's easier when the computer does it automatically. Modern navicomputers used by Star Wars are like able to hold all the fucking coordinates they can get over the extranet, and there's not really a limit to them. They just need to link up to the navicomputer exchange, like coordinate exchange, and just tell it where it wants to go, and those coordinates are fed into it, and then the computer is intelligent enough to take those basic tools and assemble for itself a map of what it needs to do and how it needs to act in hyperspace. The reason it's so impressive for Han Solo or anybody to manipulate a hyperdrive and actually do it manually is because this shit's not meant to be done manually. You know, a human mind shouldn't be able to calculate those jumps and stop them before you smash into something or drive yourself out of control because you're yanked out of hyperspace unexpectedly. So, again, this is not about processing power. It's not about the ability to contain a certain amount of memory. We have lots of computers here on the Earth that have tremendous processing power, more processing power than any human has ever had, and they're still not sentient computers, and they're still not going to be doing the things that navicomputers are doing. The fact that we have so many instances of droids having to be basically the ones that affect the hyperdrive coordinates, both in the form of astromech droids, and hell, even the Millennium Falcon is basically like droidified, just silent, in order to make the hyperdrive work. We learned that in Solo. So, I mean, you don't have to like it. This is just how it is. This is my interpretation of the universe. So definitely is the case that it's going to be very hard for the Mechanicus to figure out how to use the hyperdrives.
And I don't even think they need to use it. Since the warp in the Star Wars galaxy is so calm, you know, they can traverse the entire galaxy unimpeded. And I'm sure they'll have to stop sometimes and, you know, re-enter into the warp in a different location, you know, because I think the warp also is acting like a tunnel of some sort. You know, you don't just go from one point of the galaxy all the way to the opposite side of the galaxy without needing to exit out of the warp and enter into a different point, you know, to enter into the warp. So I still don't think that they need to use hyperdrive, the hyperdrive system and hyperspace for travel. I think their warp capabilities are efficient, and yeah, I don't see the reason why they should use hyperdrive.
Effectively. I mean, on top of that, you have to understand this too. Just even assuming that they could put together their own navicomputers, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Navicomputers aren't what you need to make hyperdrives work well. Warp drive is still better than a hyperdrive without the navicomputer infrastructure. If you don't have the huge interstellar guilds that plot out, chart out, and maintain the hyperdrive courses and inform all navicomputers on where they're going and what they're doing, if you don't have that in operation, if you don't have that present, then hyperdrives simply aren't as good as warp drives because they have to obey the laws of physics too much. They're forced to skim along hyperspace and worry about actual physical objects and mass shadows. That's not really good. That makes the going with those things extremely jerky and slow. Remember, the original Piasdia weren't defeated by the Jedi's tremendous armies or force of power or even force powers. The Piasdia originally were defeated because the hyperspacing guilds who maintained the navicomputers got fucking sick of them and decided to hack their computers and send them the wrong coordinates, and they tried to make a big jump with their armada and threw them out of the galaxy, hyperspaced them out of the galaxy out to the middle of nowhere and let them die out in the middle of nowhere. That is how the Piasdia got stranded out in space and lost their war with the rest of the galaxy. That's still very much the case now. In fact, the Wookiees got into a bit of trouble because they were basically challenging the authority of the existing hyperspace authority by making their own hyperspace guild and their own charts and their own maintained navicomputers. So even if the Imperials could access navicomputer technology, they would also need to have access to the navicomputer guilds, or rather the guilds that maintain those things. And it's not likely that they would, that they'd want to, because those guilds are all alien.
And it'll just be like the novice nobility, you know, the Navigator Guild, where they'll have to now secede to their demands and respect their authority and, work with them so that they're able to have safe passage or information pertaining to hyperspace. They'll have to also be on good terms with them. And like AFanWithTooMuchTime said right now, most of the guilds are Xeno. And you know how the Imperium of Man feels about Xeno races and Xenos having authority and power. So yeah, I don't think it'll be too much for them to stomach. Really, it'll be just way too much. And I think even the novice nobility are going to have issues with this, because now these people are going to be competing on their turf, on their territory. This is their territory. Now to be told that no, you have to share it with another guild, and mainly that guild is filled with Xeno races. They're not going to take it.
That those guilds would help them, because while those guilds claim mega neutrality, they did break it once in galactic history, and it was to defeat and destroy the Piasdia. So it tells you where they'd sit on a conflict like this pretty quickly. So there you go. I think that more or less wraps up all of these spooky questions. Let's go ahead and move up to the next set. Let's see. This one's going to come from Dezika Marwaka PL. I butchered that, but there you go. So, Q&A. When it comes to the use of canon characters from both sides, I understand that those from Star Wars are far easier to implement than those from Warhammer 40K, and far more different, and for many different reasons at that. But did it cross your mind to use some of the less important characters from Warhammer 40K, whose disappearances from the Milky Way galaxy could be achieved far easier than a character from, let's say, one of the popular novels? One such character that comes to mind, and his name is Admiral Spire from Battlefleet Gothic Armada, a game you've mentioned a few times before. And since he's basically lost in the warp, he could be used at any time, in any place, even as a Deus Ex Machina for the Imperium. And don't tell me that it wouldn't be entertaining to see Grand Admiral Thrawn battling Admiral Spire over some sector of space. I could. The fact of the matter is that I wasn't tremendous. I mean, okay, let me say this. Admiral Spire has some cruel speeches. But there isn't almost anything to him. You see what I'm saying? Like, I'd have to basically invent his character because of how little of him we see. He is a loyal, he's a loyal, powerful, intelligent admiral of the Imperial Navy who came from a planet that was condemned for having fallen to chaos. And he was not condemned for it. We know that he was tortured to earn his admiralty. But, we don't really, I don't know almost anything about the guy and his opinions on things. You know, he's pretty enigmatic. He's got that issue that a lot of video game RTS characters end up getting, and I didn't really feel inspired to use him. And more than that, I didn't feel comfortable superimposing onto him all the characterization that he should already have. But I have thought of using other characters that are in a similar position. We'll just have to wait and see when they pop in. So next one. Men of the Thousand. How many Marines did Dooku slay, and were they veterans like Arachnus? Okay, so yes, they were veterans like Arachnus. He was in a veteran squad. He went and killed them all one by one. He took his pleasure with Arachnus because he knew there wasn't any way that, you know, he knew that Arachnus was alone, that he'd already taken out the other Marines. So for the other Marines, he was much more willing to, you know, he was much more focused on coming up behind them and killing them quickly and silently. With Arachnus, he was sort of testing his more front, like, you know, what is a Space Marine capable of when he knows I'm standing here and he's able to throw what he's got at me. And, you know, Sith Lords are powerful. Standard tactical Marines can have a very hard time killing a Sith Lord outside of a very specific context. So he would have killed the whole fire team. That's about 5 Marines, I want to say. So that's, you know, 4 Marines plus Arachnus.
And like I said before, you know, with Sith Lords, they're not going to waste their time with negotiation unless, you know, you are powerful enough for them to respect or to notice or take notice of. So they're not going to be here to negotiate or to try and figure out, you know, what's your backstory and why you're here. No. No, Count Dooku is going to kill you. He's going to kill you.
How did the other Astartes not notify Arachnus of Dooku and that they were about to be killed? Jamming? No, there was no jamming. Dooku just killed them that fast. Frankly, let's say that Arachnus wasn't the last Marine, and they had the same encounter. Dooku would have killed him, cut his head clean off, before he got that message out. He would have gone out of his way to ensure that the Space Marine did not report back to the other Space Marines that he was in their perimeter. The reason he decided to tell him it was useless and not kill him immediately was because he was basically, again, taking his pleasure, mocking him, being superior over him, because he knows that he can be. He's made it safe for himself to be. But that would not have occurred if it were a different case. Did Davik Thune split apart his fleet and hit multiple targets at once? Ooh, someone's paying attention. Yes, he did. He is not just hitting this planet, though the vast majority of Davik's fleet is present here. That being said, it was very much his plan to lure the majority of the bulk of the Separatist naval defense to this planet so that other elements, smaller elements of his fleet could hit other strategic targets with different kinds of tactics that you'll learn about more, perhaps. Did they raise any other Confederacy worlds? Learn about that more later on, perhaps. Did Jabba know that the Skywatch had landed with tons of civilians before he met with Kane looking for supplies? Yes, it was not a big secret among Tatooine citizens that some kind of force or corporation or some huge operation had landed on the planet, and Jabba was in the process of getting information back about that. However, he had no idea how serious this organization was, how intensely non-compliant they would be to the standing galactic order.
It's a complete surprise. It's a shocker.
He had no idea that they would have the balls to bust into his palace and hold him at gunpoint and demand things from him. So the answer is yes. They were aware that a bunch of people from some faction had landed. They were not aware of the significance of this in any major way. They were aware that it was significant because of how many people it was, but other than that, no idea what it really meant until, of course, you saw what happened. Let's see here next. Lord Commander 3575 asks, how are you going to handle the Q&As for the final week? Okay, so the way I'm going to handle that is I'm going to make a post in the community section that is specifically to hold the Q&As for the final week, and then after the final week is done, I'll make one big Q&A addressing the things in that thread. So if you want to leave a Q&A for me for the last week when I begin to air it, look for that in the community tab. Let's see here. For Robute Gilliman and the Ultramarines and the Skywatch, note, I'm already aware that you are not going to include him in the story. Okay. Is Robute Gilliman aware of the Skywatch's reformist tendencies and codex deviations? And if so, what is his opinion of his erstwhile son's actions? He is aware. He's extremely aware. And he's very concerned about it. He obviously has a great amount of sympathy and understanding as to why someone would seek to do the things that they're doing. That being said, they're definitely, in his view, taking too much from what they were originally given permission to do. And while he doesn't necessarily want to shut them down or castigate them for this, he would certainly be very wary about suddenly including them into the Primaris project without first testing their loyalty. And you may see the results of that later on. For that matter, are the Ultramarines chapter aware of their brother's behavior? They are aware of their brother's behavior, and the biggest issue has been that they're a very mixed bag. On paper, they're not liked, and because of this, the Ultramarines and many other Ultramarine chapters are standoffish and aloof when it comes to the Skywatch. And the Skywatch kind of returned the favor, but here's the difference. The way that the Skywatch comport themselves in person has often won them more clemency and leniency than they would otherwise have received. The Skywatch are quick to eschew pride, even though this is one of the defining factors of many of the Ultramarines, and attribute pride to others. They're very quick to flatter. They're very quick to bend, not to bend the knee, but they're very quick to bow to allies if that will get them what they want. This is a little bit manipulative of the Skywatch, but because of their constantly precarious situation, they found that this flattery and eschewing of pride earns them and gets them far, far more than acting otherwise would. So when the Ultramarines have had cause, such as when they send Death Watch squads, well, the Ultramarines don't, but squads of the Death Watch that contain Ultramarines that then report to their chapter later, when they encounter the Skywatch, their personal reports are that the Skywatch are, by and large, incredibly honorable Space Marines who do their duty with the greatest of intentions, and that while the structure of their chapter and the things that the chapter does at an organizational level may be questionable, what cannot be questioned is the individual valor and faith of the Space Marines they encounter.
They know how to work in this bureaucratic mess. Instead of making enemies, appease everybody as much as possible, cooperate with them, and they'll be happy with you. They will send glowing reports about you. You will be recognized as a group worthy of being supported, worthy of having the resources and carte blanche to do what you think will be right for your chapter.
Very much like how the Dark Angels operate, where the standard Dark Angel is a pure questing knight who truly believes in the ideals of his chapter as they were originally portrayed, up until they join the inner circle and then are included in a bunch of stuff that is basically forbidden. They may not be quite as egregious in that way with the Skywatch, but it is very similar in that the standard battle brother is trained and raised and does, by his will and by his belief, comport himself with a great amount of honor and service, and that is recognized by the Space Marines who encounter them. And it's enough to keep them off their back, for the most part. What would Gulliman's reaction be to learning the Zectech force's fate? Okay, so Gulliman already discounted the Zectech as, it's great if we have them, but we probably won't get them. He sees this enormous tyrannic force coming into the sector. He sees the Drukhari planning to do a whole fucking butcher garden on them and try to take advantage of the conflict that is coming up to destroy them all. And he knows that the Zektik sector is going to be sealed off anyway, and there's a huge chance that their forces won't escape even before that happens. Which means that even if they win, even if they fight off the Tyranids, even if they don't fall to the Dark Eldar, they'll still be sealed away inside the Zektek sector, outside of his reach and unable to help him. So he's like, yeah, if they got out, that'll be great, but I'm not counting on it. And that's more or less what he's thinking. What would be Guilliman's reaction to... Oh, but you mean like learning about the Star Wars universe, of them coming here to the Star Wars universe? Guilliman would find a great amount of interest and novelty in learning about this transfer to the Star Wars universe, but until he received some reason to believe that he could affect things over there, get something from there, or get something from here over there, I think he's got too many problems on his plate to do more than spend like 10 minutes of his afternoon thinking about this other galaxy before he has to get back to fixing the Imperium and keeping it from falling apart. I'm sure if he figured out how to get there, he'd be like, yeah, let's evacuate a huge portion of the Imperium into this better galaxy, or something along those lines. I have to take time to consider what a Primarch would do in any given situation. But my point is just that unless that were the case, he probably would only find it to be a very interesting novelty, but he doesn't have the time or the application to think about it too much more than that. He's got just too much on his plate all the time. If semi-permanent travel corridor could be established between the two universes, what would Guilliman's course of action be besides sending Primaris Genseed and their war gear to the 3 Astartes chapter? So, okay. It's funny because I was just saying that. I can't answer that right off the bat. With anything concerning Primarchs, because they're supposed to be super intelligent superhumans, and I'm not a super intelligent superhuman, I need to be extremely deliberate and understanding of the things that they end up doing. Otherwise, I end up committing one of the biggest sins of Warhammer that I don't like watching happen. Which is that the Primarchs are portrayed as being short-sighted or petty or just not as superhuman as they need to be. A good example of that is in Saturnine, which Saturnine is one of the newer books, and I love it. Saturnine is fucking great. I'm definitely enjoyed that book a lot. But there is a scene in that book where two Imperial officers, a Space Marine and a human, sort of have criticism for the fact that Dorn's plan isn't quite working as well as they think it should. They're freaked out. And Dorn himself is not at this strategic meeting, which he needs to be at. He's instead conversing with Malkador, I think. They raise these concerns, one more petulantly than the other, and Jagatai Khan's reaction to it is just super petulant and incredibly childish, and it pulled me out of the narrative really, really hard. The guy is also supposed to be sort of a strategic genius, like most of the Primarchs, him especially though, and he just didn't act that way, and I didn't like that. I have so few contact points for the Khan, and one of the contact points is him just basically saying, I don't give a shit, not a single shit, and then he kicks two established commanders out of a war meeting and has them put somewhere else, and it's just that's just way too much trouble for the Khan to be doing in the middle of the Siege of Terra. He's got to grow up. So I don't want to ever do that, which means that I can't tell you precisely what Guilliman would do if he learned about this universe and there was a way of traveling to and from it. He would, the problem is that things don't escape his notice, not very easily. So he'd be very well aware of the fact that he might bring chaos with him and that it would have to be a very, very careful vetting process for sending people over there, and he'd have to have a very specific purpose. And I'd have to sit down and basically sketch it on a whiteboard. It's the only way I can even do that. So that's basically my answer to that question.
I just don't think he'll have the time to do anything about it. Like AFanWithTooMuchTime just said, that he's dealing with what's happening in the Warhammer 40K galaxy. I just don't think he will really put any notice on it, unless if there's something that changes. But until then, he's still going to focus on the Milky Way galaxy in Warhammer 40K.
Considering how Robute is just as much an excellent statesman and scholar as he is an incredible soldier and strategist, what would his interactions with various intellectuals in the Star Wars galaxy be like, such as Dooku, Thrawn, members of the Senate? So again, this is hard just to come up, just to pop off with, and it's also incredibly contextual. You know, I mean, is he sitting and casually discussing politics and morality with Count Dooku, Grand Admiral Thrawn, and the Loyalist Committee? You know, the Jedi Council. It depends on what is he doing, what are they trying to get from each other, why are they talking? That would be a huge predominant contextualizer of what they would be discussing and how they would be with each other. So without that, I can't really know. I know that he would be ridiculously impressive to all of them. Yeah, I mean, you know, if we were to break down everybody's capabilities into stats and numbers, his would be higher in just about every single category than every single person that was mentioned, if not from his actual just genetic superiority, then from his raw amount of like years of experience. The guy is hundreds of years old and has an enormous, cataclysmically enormous like breadth of experience that is, it's going to dwarf anybody who hasn't lived as long as Yoda has, at the very least. Yoda's like the only guy who could keep up with anything like that. And that's giving Yoda a lot of credit as being an innately wise person too, because you need to be more than just old. And Yoda, how old was Yoda? He was like 800, right? That counts. Yeah, Yoda's old as fuck. So I think that he might be able to keep up with stuff. But who knows? Again, Rabute would be just more intelligent at base level. So let's go ahead and continue.
Guys, I'm going to pause it right here. I'm going to save as much as I've recorded here because power's going out in the next 9 minutes. So I will be back after the power has returned. Because as you know, I've been saying that we have load shedding or power outages schedule. So yeah, it's coming up right now, and I will be back as soon as the power comes back. So yeah, pause. Okay, we are back. Let us continue.
What exactly are the Skyward? The Skyward are the inner circle of the Skywatch. The Skyward are those members of the chapter from different divisions and companies who have been trusted by Orion personally with the secrets that will safekeep the chapter and with the tasks that will do the same, but potentially at the cost of honor and glory and of any recognition ever done. These are the most self-sacrificing members of the Skywatch. These are the men who are willing to live in sin and obscurity if it means that their chapter can live in glory and achieve its light and purpose.
So the Skywatch chapter have a special forces, and that special forces is the Skyward. Okay.
That is more or less what the Skyward are. Let's see here. How powerful would you say the warlocks of the Council of Vigilance really are? Are they all epistolary level, or is there more variation? I can't really give that away because it'll be more important, but know that they're not really traditional when it comes to how you would measure out their power. They are very powerful. If you're trying to just say, okay, well, if I hit the equal sign at the end of all this complexity, what does it give you? Well, it gives you a council of psychers that are very rarely apart and very rarely act as individuals. They can, but they don't very often. When the council is together, it is difficult for any given psychic force to overcome them. Let's just say that. And that would be all of those questions. Let's move on to the next one. Crypto Penguin asks, the Doctor's revelation of how old the Imperial humans are. Is it possible we will be trying to bridge the gap between the human origins in Star Wars to those of the 40K humans, and indicating that Terra is a lost homeworld of the humans in the Star Wars universe as well? Perhaps. I can't give too much away there. But I will say this. Humans would have lived in the Star Wars universe far longer than they would have lived on Terra in the Milky Way galaxy, which implies the reverse, that Terra isn't our home planet. It's just where we arrived in the Milky Way galaxy.
Interesting. Okay.
But I can't really elucidate you as to the details of that, should I be planning to go into them, just because of the nature of that kind of thing. So there you go. Next one is from Cody Brox. Q&A. Is there a possibility of a small section of the Jedi joining? I mean, like you said, the discovery of the warp will rock the Jedi Order a bit, and it will reinforce their ideals, but also wouldn't a small section agree with the Imperials and attempt to join them because of it?
I think those who join will probably be those who are being corrupted by the dark side of the Force. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't see Jedi heading towards the Imperium of Man. And you have to be human. And, you know, the Imperium of Man forces are going to kill you on the spot because you are a witch. So I just don't see how they're going to defect to the Imperium of Man. I don't see it, but okay.
The Imperials use Force users as telephones and bazookas. They have very little respect for Force users. They have a tremendous fear of psychers and of mutants and aliens. It is extremely unlikely that any sizable section would ever of the Jedi Order would ever choose to join the Imperium. Even if they agree, okay, yes, your extreme over-the-top tactics are required to defeat the aliens of this universe, or the monsters or threats that you face in the other galaxy.
They would torture you and extract that information from you. They're not going to cooperate with you and call you my buddy, my pal, my comrade in arms. No, they will tie you up to some chair and torture you until you blurt out all that you know, and then they'll kill you.
They wouldn't agree that treating Force users and Force sensitives in the way that they're being treated now would be the optimal way to do any of that. They would be like, yo, we have technology that lets us do all the things that you break psychers into doing. We do not need to have astropaths if we have, hyperspace communication nodes. That's kind of like the issue with that. They would not... It would be very hard to find any particular example of even a single Jedi coming to the realization that he deserves to be hated and abused for the sake of the greater galaxy, much less a large section of the Jedi. That's not appealing to the Jedi or the Sith. Question 2 is there a possibility that the Krieg soldier that we were following, 1313, will go back to his brother from the beginning that was paralyzed? No, there's no chance.
1315? No, I think he's dead. I think he's dead now.
Chance of that. 1313 is not thinking of that. It does not occur to him to do that kind of thing. And if it did occur to him to do that, and he did go back, and the guy was somehow still alive, the trooper would be at best extremely bemused and perplexed by why this is even happening. But most likely that Krieger would even chastise 1313 for wasting the effort, or denying him a death on the battlefield, which is what Kriegers sort of aspire for. 1313 does not ascribe any preserving value whatsoever to the life of his brother. And that is entirely because he was trained to view himself and anyone who looks like him, and that they're Kriegers just like him, with that kind of mentality. It would be very alien and weird and counterintuitive for him to think differently, and he'd have to be trained to think differently. That isn't to say that he thinks of all Imperial soldiers that way, though he does to a degree. He does think that that's more or less what their purpose is. But in his mind, as in the mind with all Kriegers, there stands a distinct difference between Kriegers and other soldiers of the Imperium, even really good ones like Cadians. So let's see here. Question 3. Do you think, in your opinion, that the Mandalorians would join the Imperium due to their resentment of the Republic and their views about themselves being humans and the best warriors in the galaxy? So,
are all Mandalorians human beings? Because if they're not, it's still the Imperium of Man is going to, kill off all Xenokind in the Mandalorian, different creeds of Mandalore. They're going to just wipe out everyone that does not conform to their way and style of governing. So, and you know how strong-willed the Mandalorians are, how independent they are, how they believe in their creed and in the way of life and stuff like that. So I don't see them kneeling or bowing themselves down to an overlord. I just don't see that happening, unless if the chapter master of the Skywatch or the Crimson Razors is able to obtain the black saber, and they say, I assume control over Mandalore because I have the black saber, then maybe maybe they can have Mandalore. But otherwise, I think they're very independent, very strong-willed people, and I'm sure there are other Xeno races within their society. So I don't think they'll allow themselves to be subsumed by the Imperium of Man. I just don't see that happening. They will fight.
Not all Mandalorians are human. And this would be the thing that causes a bit of problem with all of the Mandalorian clans joining up. I could see them cutting a deal with the Imperium pretty easily, though. Especially if the Imperium's like, okay, just leave your helmets on and we'll all just treat you like Mandalorians. And, as long as we can't tell you're not human, then we won't treat you like you're not human. I can see that very easily being an alliance or even an incorporation between them. It would be very easy for members of the Imperial command cast, especially Space Brains, to prove to the Mandalorians that they are strong and worthy of respect, and that they don't use the Force or warp powers or Force witchery to win their battles for them, which the Mandalorians would they would respect that with a tremendous amount. So definitely possible for strong and powerful alliances between the Mandalorians and the Imperium, but they're also going to be incredibly contextual. It's going to depend on how they encounter each other, who makes that contact, what is offered, stuff like that. Let's see here. Panzer Steel Pro asks, was there any Calexis assassins within the Imperial refugees? I can't tell you that. Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. But if there are, if I told you, to give away that there's an assassin. Man of the 1,000. Will you use a voice changer for some of the more difficult voices, i.e. females and people like Gax?
Why? Unless, of course, he wants to hire, voice actors or have some sort of, app that is able to change his voice in some sort of way. But so far, I don't see any issue. I don't see any problem. I mean, the way this guy can voice act, these various types of characters, especially when it comes to the female side, it's amazing. I mean, I can't do that with my voice. I've tried. I can't do what he does. And I'm impressed, really. I don't see any reason why he should get new people, unless of course he really wants to, due to his own reasons. But currently, right now, I'm satisfied.
Voice changes aren't very good. They don't work very well. They sound very obviously voice changey, and in my opinion, they tend to degrade the quality of the voice I put forward. You'll notice that my female voices usually have the pitch turned up, at least by 1 octave. And even then, you'll probably sometimes notice that I can't hit certain tones with them, because if I do, it becomes too obvious that I've put the voice through a voice changer. And my idea is not to do that. If I'm voicing a female character, the idea is to sound more female and not mechanical or synthesized, which would that's not what I'm aiming for. Additionally, Gaxian would, I don't know what kind of voice changer I would do to get a voice like that. So unfortunately, I think that voices will have to just, kind of stay for Space Marines since I have their power armor, and only a few examples of that at that. Because really all that I can do with a voice changer is like do Dreadnought voice and do Space Marine voice, and anything else has a huge limitation put on it. That's what I've discovered. Alright, I'm getting kind of tired. So let's do one more. Q&A. Oh, my bad. There we go. The Omnissiah. Q&A. What if instead of the Imperium, it was a Chaos fleet of similar size that arrived? It would have a very, very different tact. I mean, for one thing, when you say a Chaos fleet, what do you even mean? Like, you mean a Chaos fleet of Chaos Undivided, a Chaos fleet composed of one faction or of several factions unified? Because, well, because each faction within the Chaos factions would behave very differently upon entering the universe. And if they are a faction of a bunch of different Chaos factions unified for a temporary cause like a crusade, they would immediately fucking break off and maybe even fight each other to the death once they realized that they'd arrived in a new universe, and what that could mean for them, and what it could mean for their opportunities, and what it would mean to be competed with. So that is hugely contextual. I would need to know precisely what fleet or what factions or who the fuck is in charge, or who's the different peoples who would be in charge, if it's an alliance. It's hard.
I think they would self-implode, you know, even if it's not, you know, Chaos United, all the different factions, but if it's just one, you know, Chaos faction that has arrived in the Star Wars galaxy, I think they would implode on each other. They would just start destroying each other. They wouldn't even have the ambitions of expanding their influence, their reach in the Star Wars galaxy. I think they would be stuck on one planet, and that's where they stop. You know, maybe they would hop over to the next system, but really they just wouldn't be as effective as some people would think. You know, yeah, they would need some sort of motivation to do all the things that they're willing to do. And since they don't hear their commands from their superiors or from the Chaos Gods themselves, you know, I don't know how they're going to operate in this galaxy as a whole. Yeah.
To know. But it would be very different from what the Imperium is doing, with entirely different goals. Yep. So, leading from that, how much havoc could a Dark Apostle cause if they got onto the HoloNet with their preaching? Either an endless amount or almost none. Dark Apostles aren't so dangerous because they're so convincing. I mean, they can be convincing, but generally even their convincingness comes from the contrast of the fucking tyrannical Nazi Imperium surrounding the person they're trying to convince of things. You see what I'm saying? So most of their convincing comes from corruption. Just hearing a Dark Apostle speak can sway your mind towards insanity and make their preaching more palpable, or palatable rather, and acceptable. In a galaxy where that's not innate, in a galaxy where the god of this Dark Apostle is still a nascent god, is not yet awake or powerful, this could greatly reduce the effect of a Chaos Preacher or even a Dark Apostle, even if they were broadcasted across the HoloNet. Because frankly, when you break down what Chaos asks you to do most of the time, and you break down what it even tells you that the world is really supposed to be like, it's not a tremendously appealing message. And it requires a supernatural influence to make it more appealing. This is part of the reason why, while some planets in the Imperium had prevalent Chaos cults when the Emperor arrived on them, most didn't, and most places that did had those cults living as underground sects and not as ruling powers. You know, that shit's not super appealing to anybody with two brain cells to rub together and who isn't in so much pain and suffering that they're not willing to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. So again, either a lot because of dark corruption flowing through their words and the people of the Star Wars universe being totally unready to handle chaos corruption and what it will do to their minds, or not at all. And this dude will have like 36 views on his fucking YouTube channel because he's preaching about skinning babies and everyone's just looking at him like, that's weird. I don't think I want to watch that guy anymore. So, you know, great. That is also really dependent, but it's definitely going to land in the extremes of one or the other. Very, very rare. Rarely will that land anywhere in the middle. It'll require kind of a special Dark Apostle for that. And honestly, if a Dark Apostle was not relying on chaos corruption to get their word across, and they'd be fucking great orators. So, who knows? Darth Sidious. Oh, hello, my lord. Q&A. Will Kane find a mood kindred in this new galaxy? You betcha. Just wait and see what I have planned for Kane. Q&A from Luke Sheely. Is there a chance of getting Dirge from the 2003 Clone Wars show in this show, or is he already dead? I'm going to go ahead and say he's already dead. Dirge is a little bit problematic because of some of the things that he doesn't mingle very well with the Disney canon. Let me just say that. And let's do one more Q&A. Will there be more CIS-focused stuff? From Victor Wilfong. Yes, there will be, but only if we ever get to Season 2. So, we'll wait and see on that. And with that, I think that I have done a fair amount of Qing and Aing, and so, my friends, I will leave you at that. I'm working on the new episodes all the time. I recently rewrote the third of these new episodes, so it's great. I also added things to the second and first, so they have also grown larger from where they were originally completed, and that will be great for you once you get them. There's going to be 7 episodes. At least I'm aiming for 7. God, give me the strength to rein my narrative into 7 episodes, please. So, I'll let you guys know, keep you informed on what's going on. But until then, I'll see you next time.
Okay, guys, that is it with Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K episode 24 after talk made by a fan with too much time. And yeah, there were a lot of questions being answered here, very deep and complicated ones in terms of the warp, in terms of the possibilities of Roberto Gilliman knowing the existence of the Star Wars galaxy, in terms of, the evolution of High Gothic and Low Gothic, how it would sound like, why would it sound like this? And also, AFanWithTooMuchTime discussing about, Games Workshop's objective of destroying, the content creators out there who create Warhammer 40K content, trying to silence them, trying to bottle them up, and giving space and free reign for their Warhammer Plus to take over that niche market, if I can say that. And also, discussing about, a future dialogue between the chapter master of the Skywatch, the leadership of the Galactic Republic, the leadership of the CIS, whether that's also going to be possible. It can happen. You just need that setting to be there for something like that to happen. And also about the Mandalorians, whether they would work with the Imperium of Man. I still don't see it. I still really don't see them working in partnership with the Imperium of Man. I can't see it right now. But AFanWithTooMuchTime does say that it is possible that it could happen. But when you're dealing with the Imperium of Man, they are the dominating force. They are the boss. Anyone else that wishes to have a partnership with them, they must realize that they are, the employees in this situation. They are the ones who will be obeying commands. They will not be the ones giving out commands. And the Astartes, gaining the respect of the Mandalorians, I don't know if the Astartes want that, or, would want to aspire to be respected by human beings. I mean, they already see themselves superior. They already, are physically superior, and, they have their weapons, they have their armor. I just don't know if this would be a reciprocal kind of relationship. I think it will be a relationship of the master and the slave, if I can say that. And that's how I see it. And that's why I'm saying, Mandalore, I don't know if they would bow to anyone that is not part of their society, part of their culture. They've been fighting for their own existence and independence from the Galactic Republic, and even when the Galactic Republic transformed into the Empire, they've been fighting for their own existence. So I don't know if they would want to be, under the foot of another empire, and that is the Imperium of Man. And yeah, there were many other questions revolving around, the possibilities of how the the chaos from the Warhammer side, if it were to be the invading force of the Star Wars galaxy, and how would they operate in the Star Wars galaxy. I still say or maintain that, they won't be as successful as the Imperium of Man. They would fall into infighting, into conflict, and they would fizzle themselves out eventually. And because they don't have communication with their Chaos Guards, or maybe they would, I don't know, but it just wouldn't be as effective in the Star Wars galaxy as they were in their home turf of Warhammer 40K Milky Way galaxy. Yeah. Oh yes, as well as, the possibility of time travel in terms of humanity either coming from the Star Wars galaxy going to the Warhammer galaxy, or the Warhammer galaxy humans going to the Star Wars galaxy. Where did it start out first? Who had humanity first? Was it the Star Wars or was it the Warhammer side? Very interesting questions there. And yeah, guys, I guess that's it. That's it for this morning, I should say. I slept and I only woke up around 4 o'clock. So yeah, that's it for this morning. And remember, guys, if you want to check out the original video as well as AFanWithTooMuchTime's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I will see you guys next week. Okay? Good morning.